The scorching sun hung high in the sky as the sound of an approaching train echoed through the quiet outskirts of town. Tension crackled in the air. A black man, wrists bound, struggled against the thick rope tying him to the tracks. His breathing was heavy, his eyes darting between the railroad and the officer standing over him, an older cop with a hardened face, his badge gleaming in the light. "You think you can just walk free after what you did?" The officer sneered, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. The man tied to the tracks swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "I didn't do anything," he gasped, his voice strained with fear. But the officer only smirked, stepping back as the train whistle grew louder. Just then, tires screeched on the pavement nearby. A black SUV skidded to a stop, and a man jumped out, a younger man in a crisp suit, his FBI badge flashing as he ran toward the scene. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, eyes wide with horror. The older cop stiffened, turning to face his son. The train was seconds away. Time was running out. The younger man's pulse raced as he took in the scene, the ropes, the fear in the man's eyes, the train barreling closer. His father stood rigid, his jaw clenched, as if caught between duty and something darker. "Dad, untie him. Now," the FBI agent demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. The older cop didn't move. His fingers flexed at his sides, his expression unreadable. "You don't know what this man has done," he muttered. The man on the tracks gasped. "I haven't done anything," he cried. "He's lying." The agent's heart pounded. He had seen his father lose his temper before, but this was something else. "Dad, this isn't justice," he said, stepping closer. "This isn't who you are." His father's eyes flickered with something, hesitation, anger, maybe even guilt. The train's whistle blared again, louder this time, rattling the ground beneath them. "Back away, son," the cop warned, his voice low. The agent's stomach twisted. He had spent his entire life believing in the law, believing in his father. But now, standing here, watching the seconds tick away, he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. The FBI agent's mind raced. He couldn't waste another second. The train was too close. He stepped forward, hands outstretched, his voice firm but calm. "Dad, listen to me. This isn't right. Whatever you think he's done, there's a process, an investigation. You know that." His eyes locked onto his father's, searching for the man who had once taught him about honor and justice. The older cop's fingers twitched. His gaze flickered between his son and the man on the tracks, who was struggling harder now, pure terror in his eyes. The train rolled closer, kicking up dust and shaking the ground. "He's dangerous," the cop muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. The agent's breath was shallow. "You don't believe that," he pressed. "Dad, if you do this, there's no coming back." The man tied to the tracks coughed, his voice hoarse. "Please, I have a family." Something cracked in the agent's chest. You could see the conflict warring in his father's expression. But the train was seconds away, and hesitation wasn't an option. Then, for the first time, the older cop's mask slipped, his eyes darkened. "You don't understand, son," he said quietly. "There are things you don't know." The train was almost there, its deafening roar shaking the ground beneath them. The FBI agent's chest tightened as he saw the sheer panic in the tired man's eyes. There was no more time to argue. He lunged forward. "Stop," his father shouted, reaching for his holster, but hesitation slowed him. The agent dropped to his knees, fumbling with the thick knots. His hands trembled, sweat dripping down his face as he yanked at the ropes. The train's whistle screamed through the air. Gravel shot up from the tracks as the massive machine thundered toward them. The older cop's fingers tightened around his gun. His face was unreadable, but something flickered behind his eyes, a storm of emotions crashing together, too fast to untangle. "Dad, help me," the agent yelled, his voice raw. "Whatever this is, we can fix it. Just help me." The man on the tracks gasped, sucking in frantic breaths. His wrists were bleeding from his own desperate struggle. The train was only feet away now, the force of its approach pulling at their clothes. And then, just as the moment reached its breaking point, the older cop made his choice. His hand moved, but not in the way anyone expected. At the last possible second, the older cop reached down, not for his gun, but for the ropes. His fingers fumbled as he yanked at the knots alongside his son. The train was almost on top of them, the metal screaming against the tracks. With a final pull, the ropes gave way. The FBI agent grabbed the man by his shoulders and yanked him off the rails just as the train rolled past, missing them by inches. The force knocked all three men to the ground, dust and wind whipping around them. For a long moment, there was only silence, except for the train fading into the distance. The man who had been tied up lay on his side, gasping for breath, his body shaking. The agent sat up, his heart pounding. Then he turned to his father. But the older cop wasn't looking at them. His expression had shifted, his eyes scanning the area as if he expected something, or someone, else to appear. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders tight. The agent followed his gaze, confusion creeping in. "Dad," he asked cautiously. The older man didn't answer. Instead, he exhaled sharply and muttered, "We were never supposed to walk away from this." The FBI agent's breath hitched. His father's words hung heavy in the air. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. The older cop didn't answer right away. His hands rested on his knees, his eyes locked on the ground as if piecing something together. Then finally, he exhaled. "I wasn't acting alone," he admitted. "Someone wanted this to happen." The man they had just freed pushed himself up, still trembling. "Who?" he demanded. "Who wanted me dead?" Before the older cop could answer, the sound of approaching cars broke the silence. The agent turned, spotting two black SUVs speeding down the dirt road. His gut twisted. Something wasn't right. His father stood slowly, his body tense. "They're not here to help," he murmured. The agent's mind raced. If his father had been ordered to do this, then whoever was coming now wouldn't be happy that he had failed. The SUV skidded to a stop. Men in suits stepped out, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a man with sharp eyes and a quiet smirk, spoke first. "Well," he said, looking at the three of them, "this is disappointing." The agent's blood ran cold. They weren't safe yet. The FBI agent squared his shoulders, his pulse pounding in his ears. His father stood beside him, silent but tense. The man they had just saved looked from one face to another, his breathing still uneven. The suited man took a slow step forward, his smirk never fading. "You were supposed to follow orders," he said, eyes locked on the older cop. "But I suppose loyalty isn't what it used to be." The agent didn't wait for an explanation. He subtly shifted his stance, ready for whatever came next. "Who are you?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. The man chuckled. "Let's just say, we handle things when the system fails." His smile faded. "And you just made our job a whole lot harder." For a moment, no one moved. Then, almost as if accepting his fate, the older cop let out a slow breath. "I won't let this happen," he said. "Not anymore." The agent wasn't sure what his father meant, but he saw the shift in him. A man who had crossed a line and was finally stepping back. The suited man studied them for another beat, then sighed. "Shame," he muttered. Then he turned. "Let's go." The SUVs rolled back to life, disappearing down the road. The agent watched them go, questions still spinning in his mind. But for now, they were alive. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what his father would do next. But maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing.